One of the biggest topics in music right now is the topic of music plagiarism. From Lana Del Rey to Ed Sheeran, big artists are being sued left, right and centre. Nowadays we seem to see more of these cases than ever before, and there are a few possible explanations for this, but we'll get onto that later. In this video I'm going to look at how plagiarism cases work, how technology has been affecting copyright cases, and the ways in which future technology could help with these cases. The first question we have to ask is, what actually is plagiarism? Well, plagiarism.org offers the following definition from the Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary. They say that to plagiarize means to steal and pass off the ideas of someone else as your own, to use someone else's work without crediting the source, to commit literary theft, to present as new and original an idea or product derived from an existing source. Official UK law states that any musical recording is automatically granted copyright for a period of 70 years from the date that the original author dies. Acts restricted by this copyright include copying, adapting, or performing the copyrighted work without the author's consent. And this is where the law becomes much less black and white, as how exactly do you classify whether or not a work has been copied or adapted? When plagiarism cases go to court, it will be up to a jury to decide whether or not the work really has been copied, based on the evidence they've received from the artists and musicologists on both sides. The rulings come down to two major points. Firstly, access. The claimant has to prove that the defendant has had access to their work, so that they can prove that they would have been able to rip it off. The issue here is that since the internet came along, access has become almost a moot point. If a song has been released publicly, anyone is considered to have access to it, through Spotify, YouTube, or any other digital medium. Which leaves us with the second factor, similarity. Generally, professional musicologists will be brought in here to try and determine how similar the pieces are musically. Do they use the same chord sequence, the same melody, the same rhythm? This part is the most subjective, and the reason why most cases are so complex. Since the introduction of the digital age, copyright laws have remained more or less unchanged. In fact, it's only really now that new reforms are taking place to address the difficulties that digital services bring with them. The EU wrote new copyright legislation recently aimed at making it easier for musicians, TV makers and publishers to make money out of their work online. Since Brexit, however, it's still up in the air whether or not we will have to abide by these new rules, since we will likely leave the EU before signing any of this new legislation. Although, as Jonathan Bailey points out in an article for Plagiarism Today, it stands to reason that the UK will do everything it can to avoid major disruptions or shifts in its law, including copyright. Since none of the current copyright harmonisations have been particularly controversial in the UK, it's likely they will remain intact. The new legislation involves using technology like YouTube's Content ID in order to detect copyright infringing works so that these can be taken down more quickly. Whilst on the surface this looks like something aimed at helping ensure composers are paid fairly for their work, this could actually lead to more issues over false takedown notices. Technologies like Content ID are able to automatically detect cases of copyright infringement by comparing uploaded content against their database of copyrighted material, and when a match is found, they are then able to issue a takedown notice. But this system often fails, issuing false takedown notices against creators. A music technologist from Australia received 5 copyright infringement claims on a video of just white noise, something which can't be copyrighted, simply because Content ID had found other videos of white noise in its database. Facebook has also been known to have similar issues. In 2017, they issued a takedown notice for an ARS video that allegedly contained 6 seconds of copyrighted material belonging to Pink Floyd. The audio in question turned out to be from a NASA recording in the public archive. Once again, an uncopyrighted piece of content was the cause of an infringement claim. In this case, technology seems to be trying to help fight copyright, but it is not yet sufficiently advanced to do so accurately, and so it seems to end up backfiring on independent artists and new content creators. One of the most famous cases in recent years was when the Marvin Gaye estate sued Robin Thicke and Pharrell Williams for allegedly ripping off Got to Give It Up with their track Blurred Lines. Thicke and Williams were found guilty and ordered to pay $7.4 million. And one of the most damning pieces of evidence in this case was Williams' own testimony, where he admitted that Gaye's music was part of the soundtrack of his youth, and that he was channeling that 70s feeling. The controversial ruling of this high-profile case seemed to inspire a whole host of other artists to come forward with their plagiarism cases. To help gain a better insight into this topic, I spoke to Kurt Dahl, a music lawyer and rock drummer from Canada who has written extensively on the topic of music plagiarism and who very kindly agreed to share his expertise. We discussed the possibility of the law changing in response to the results of cases like these.
Well, it's interesting because the law sort of, it always sort of reacts to situations. Like I don't see like legislation happening because every song is so different. Um, but if like if the cases keep, if plagiarism cases keep being successful, then it won't like the law won't change, but like the precedent will change, right? So people, I think, will start suing more if these lawsuits go through.
And we do seem to have seen a rise in claims in recent years, so perhaps the success of this case and others like it are one of the main reasons for this increase. The other main reason for the rise in claims, as previously mentioned, is that proving access is now far easier than it used to be, which means that half the battle is already won before the case goes to court. Another case worth looking at is the Stairway to Heaven case. Led Zeppelin were accused of ripping off the main riff from a section of a Spirit song called Taurus, but they successfully defended this case. First, let's take a quick listen to what the two riffs sound like on their own so we can compare. Whilst there are certainly similarities between the two riffs, the musicologist for the defence stated that the descending chromatic minor line progressions shared by both songs have been a common musical device for centuries. Spirit did not create the key of A minor. Access was also harder to prove in this case, as the song was written before the days of music streaming, and although Jimmy Page, the guitarist for Led Zeppelin, was found to have a Taurus CD in his collection, he claimed adamantly that it had not influenced him, and so the jury couldn't be 100% confident in terms of access either. So did this claim have genuine merit, or were tourists simply searching for a payout? If they'd been successful, it likely would have set a precedent for even more claims in the coming years. But perhaps the number of claims are still likely to rise anyway. I was curious to get Kurt's opinion on this.
Again, like in 10 years, like I'm curious where things are going to be at in terms of these lawsuits because they sort of keep popping up.
Yeah. Do you think the number of them will keep rising? Yeah.
I think so. I mean, and maybe part of it's because people are making less money from recorded music. I don't know, but
Yeah.
it's like that people are sort of desperate. But I don't know. I mean, maybe I don't know if that's the case, but I think they will keep going up.
And some die-hard Led Zeppelin fans have certainly argued that the Stairway to Heaven case was a matter of tourists being desperate. All this begs the question, when is it actually worth making a claim?
It takes a lot of work and a lot of, it takes a lot of time, a lot of my time. So it's gotta be worth it. But also, most of the times I hear like just a slight similarity, and it's got to be like a full-on rip off. Otherwise it's not worth it. And then there's got to be money there, like, otherwise it's not worth the time, right? Like if the song that plagiarized you isn't a hit, then what's the point, right? I mean, aside from pride, I guess, or ego, maybe.
In the case of Taurus and Led Zeppelin, Taurus definitely had the financial incentive, as the potential payout could have been huge. Unfortunately for them, it was, just as Kurt said is often a problem, only a slight similarity, and so it wasn't enough to make the jury swing in their favour. One question really worth asking is, why do we plagiarise? Why would a big artist copy someone else's work when they've had plenty of success with their own original ideas? Well, the answer to that is that generally they wouldn't, at least not intentionally. The issue is that our brains tend to encourage it. When we listen to music, it activates all sorts of neural networks in our brain, affecting areas including emotional response, motor activity, and most importantly, creativity. What this means is that any music we listen to is affecting our creative process, influencing us to potentially subconsciously create something that is similar to what we've heard. What you also have to remember when it comes to music is that certain things just sound good. Western pop music all uses the same kind of musical scale, and some musical intervals are just agreed to sound better than others when writing melodies. This means that the number of musical pathways is actually much more limited in pop music, simply because it's a more formulaic process. I talked once more with Kurt about why it's so easy to accidentally create something that's similar to what you've already heard. It always feels like a very easy thing to do, like when you're writing.
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, and maybe it's because there's only so many songs to write out there, like only so many chord structures. So in 100 years, maybe these cases will just be like crazy, through the roof. It's hard to tell.
And he's right, there are only so many chords and chord sequences out there, at least ones that we find pleasing. So we often borrow these from music that came before, something that has always happened within the industry, as Kurt rightly points out.
I don't know. In pop music, again, I'm a rock and roll guy, and most of the music I love is like from the '60s, '70s, like sort of the golden era of rock and roll. Like Hendrix and Dylan and the Stones and the Beatles. Like so, and a lot of that was based on blues, like ripping off old blues musicians. So it wasn't like it wasn't like it was 100%. Like nothing is 100% original, right? But so at least that to me, like you can go from Chuck Berry to the Beatles, and you can see where they've kind of lifted things, but they take it somewhere new.
Back in the early days of rock and roll, nearly every artist was using a variation of the same 12-bar blues chord sequence, and if anyone had ever tried to copyright that, then the number of plagiarism claims would be endless. Borrowing some small elements of a piece has always been common in music, so the question we ask is, at what point does borrowing become stealing? With more people making claims than ever before, borrowing musical elements is becoming a far riskier game. So how might plagiarism cases be handled in the future? There's actually quite a bit of research going into how technology can be used to assist in cases like these. Mostly these focus on ways of detecting similar melodies. One group of researchers attempted to create similarity algorithms by measuring note intervals and distances, which would be able to give a value for how similar the melodies are in two different songs, with an effort to take into account just how undefined plagiarism findings are, as you have to remember that there is no minimum requirement for the number of notes that appear in both pieces, nor is there any other similar scale that the law works on. A somewhat less complex solution that was suggested by students at the Israel Institute of Technology involved converting the melodies in question to MIDI with an algorithm that could extract the melody and then comparing a spectral analysis of the two. The main issue with this solution was that the melody extraction was fairly inaccurate for polyphonic pieces of music, so this would need a great deal of work if it were to be useful in court cases. There are even some tools which have been suggested for detecting plagiarism before it gets out the door. A group of Korean engineers proposed a melody searching database where you'd be able to input your melody and find out if something similar already existed. Whether any of these solutions will actually make it to the courtroom is still up for debate. A lot of further research would be needed to make these ideas feasible, and a change in the law would also likely be necessary in order for a court to accept the results of any of these algorithms as legitimate evidence. The idea of a melody database is perhaps the most interesting. If that could be achieved, and artists could check for infringement with every song they release, then perhaps the days of copyright claims could be almost entirely put behind us.